Hey, I think we're live. Brett, how are you?
I'm doing good. How about yourself, Jeff?
Doing all right. Doing all right. Just, enjoying the home. Haven't really gone anywhere for a while, but I don't think there's anywhere to go.
Yeah,
Um,
same here.
Welcome everybody on a chilly Tuesday afternoon in Chicago. Brett's a little further up north in Madison, Wisconsin. It's probably a little colder up there. Did you get any snow? We had snow today.
Yeah, we had snow today too. We've had snow, sun, everything, all four seasons. It's been great.
Awesome. Well, that's kind of the par for the course. Love to hear where you guys are from. So go ahead and post in the chat. Tell us a little bit like where you're from. We're going to have two pieces of technology that you can use within this webinar today. So we have our chat, which is what you guys are using right now. It's a great way to post a quick message, kind of let us know, hey, go into that a little deeper. Tell me a little bit more about that. Don't talk so much about that. I don't really care what you're talking about. Why did I join this webinar? You're amazing. Throw that stuff into chat. The second thing I got for you is on your screen, you'll also see the ability to do a Q&A. So Q&A is where we'd love for you to post questions that you want us to answer in this webinar. It'll be an opportunity for us to answer those at the end and give us a chance to get through the content and then get to your questions at the end. So if you have questions, please post them in the Q&A. And we'll get those at the end. So welcome to today's webinar. We're talking today about managing data, specifically about managing data through changing economic times. This webinar was kind of built off of a conversation that Brett and I were having while looking at some macro and micro, that's right, we're gonna get into some economic terms today, views of our customers. And so how did we used to do things like 3 weeks ago? How did we used to do things here at Seller Labs? And how do we do things now? And how has that changed through what's happening in the market? And how do we take what is happening in the market and look at our stuff in a different way? And that's what we're going to really kind of cover in today. So for those of you that don't know me, my name is Jeff Cohen. I'm the VP of Marketing here at Seller Labs. And my co-host, really the guy bringing the knowledge for today, is Mr. Bret Darby. You want to introduce yourself, Bret?
Yeah, thank you, Jeff. Hey, my name is Bret Darby, and I'm an account director here with Seller Labs. I'm also the director of managed services. Kind of oversee our Seller Labs managed services solutions and try to help you guys find success with your advertising on Amazon.
Great. So we are going to start with a poll. Just a really simple poll question for everybody here is, how are you guys doing from a business perspective? Played with us a little bit, way up, way down, a little bit up, a little bit down, about the same. I wanted to add the don't ask, like I just don't even want to talk about it. But how are you doing? We don't typically share the results of how people are doing, but we're going to share this so you guys can see how other people feel that they're doing, because I think it's really important and critical. So we'll go ahead and share these results. So here's what's interesting about these results. Not everybody took the poll, but it's about even, way up, way down, in the middle, about the same, which is, interestingly enough, Brett, it's very similar to what we're seeing in general across the board. And we're seeing people who are way up and way down, either on a category level or a SKU level or an inventory level. And this isn't something that's impacting everybody the same way. And it's something that's impacting different people in different ways. It's impacting some people more and some people less. Some people have other channels. Some people have merchant fulfilled. Some people's products just aren't needed today. Some people's products are needed more today. I talked to a friend yesterday. He normally does around 200,000 a month in sales. He did 2 million in March. Now he has a product that is that took off. If we look at search terms, I'm not going to say what it was. If we look at search terms, it took off, and he had the ability to keep up with the inventory demands and move to merchant fulfilled and all these other things that allowed him to exponentially grow his business in a short period of time. So it wasn't from price gouging or anything like that. It was from understanding the data, making decisions, and evaluating those decisions along the way. And that's exactly what we're going to cover here today. And so a lot of this comes from a lot of what of how Bret and I look at this stems from a Seller Labs philosophy. And so one more, Bret. That philosophy is that you will never have 100% of the data to make a correct decision. And therefore, what we tell our engineers and what we tell our employees is that you have to use the data that you have to make the best decision possible. And as the data changes, you have to reevaluate your decision and pivot when necessary. So think about that. We get into an analysis paralysis where we're always looking for the data to give us the answer, but you will never have 100% of that data to get that correct answer. And so I want to have Bret, have you share a little bit about some of the findings from the data that you've seen aggregated across a large swath of clients over the last 3 months, 3+ months, and how you look at that data today, you know, and use that to make some determinations of how to move forward.
Yeah, absolutely, Jeff. And I think the first thing that we got to focus on here is actually the audiences that are out there shopping. You know, how many buyers are actually out there actively looking for products? So what I did was I aggregated a number of session data from a number of accounts into one file so I could start to summarize it and start to understand the macro trends, what's really happening when we look at this data. And if you looked at this on March 15th, right around the time when I looked at it first, you'd see a pretty downward slope. You'd see a pretty aggressive downward slope, and you'd see that the trend does not look very good. I mean,
but that was expected coming out of. I mean, think about this. This is coming out of holiday, right?
Yep.
So we're talking about coming out of, like, if you were to extend this another 45 days to the left into the middle of November, you're talking about peaks, right? So that's what you're kind of fighting against.
Yeah, exactly. And so some of this is natural. Some of it you'll see in a second. It comes from the years before and years before that as well. Some of this is a change in the way consumers are shopping. So when we actually look at that same data set included from the 15th all the way up until the beginning of this month, we start to see a different picture. And this is summarized by weeks. We can see that downward trend was a fairly aggressive drop. You know, a lot of people lost confidence in what they were going to buy. A lot of people are changing their habits. But what we're seeing right now is that silver lining. We're seeing the light at the end of the tunnel because we're starting to see that rebound in sessions and traffic. Really great sign. It's not going to revert immediately in all categories, but this is looking at non-essential categories. I tried to make sure we weren't including anything that was hand sanitizer, toilet paper, things like those. These are simply products that lost demand, at least temporarily, because people started focusing on different things, focusing on necessities rather than nice to haves. But I love to see that upward trend at the end. I'm going to keep forecasting this out as we get more data and hopefully continue to see that trend rebound.
And I think that what the first spike that you see there, if you look at the dates carefully, is that first spike actually comes from Valentine's Day. So imagine that non-essential products saw a spike around Valentine's Day, and then they started to trail off till around St. Patrick's Day. And then kicking off around St. Patrick's Day spring break, they naturally started to come back up, right? So if we look at last year and we say that's natural, right, because it didn't have any outside force upon it, what we saw this year with the outside force is more of the abruptness of what came down. Now, what's important about this statistic is that this data here is driven off of traffic, not off of conversions. And so some of the other things that we've been seeing with people has been driven around this idea that traffic has started to increase, but conversions are kind of moving a little bit slower behind the people's ability to want something and then them actually buy it. So have you been seeing a similar across your data?
Absolutely. And one of the saving graces is as that traffic declined, we saw some conversion rates stay pretty consistent simply because the audience was diminished. Instead of 100 people shopping, you have 50 or you have 40. But naturally, some subset of those are still going to convert. So we saw a lot of categories where conversion rates held true. It's just a greatly diminished amount of traffic. And so that helped us maintain ACOS and TACOS goals, keep things in line. And we had to change some of our optimization practices to make that happen. But fortunately, we were quick to adapt, quick to react to it, and we were able to make some changes that helped us out.
Great. So that leads us right into like our first concept that we want you guys to understand today. This concept comes to you by a book. It's called The Lean Startup by Eric Ries. And this book chronicles the tech startup community in Israel. And if you're not familiar with the tech startup community in Israel, it's a very fast-paced technological startup that is built off of this idea of learn, build, and measure. And using these three components, you're supposed to decide along the way whether you hit a moment of pivot or persevere. And so you develop a hypothesis, you then build an experiment, and you measure it with a baseline, against a baseline, you analyze that, and then you determine whether it's time to pivot or persevere. And this is a concept that we use internally in our company, and it's one that I've used for a long time. And each kind of moment along the way is your opportunity as a business owner to ask your question, is this a time where I pivot or is this a time where I persevere? And Brett's going to get into a little bit of some of the pivot or persevere moments specific to advertising on Amazon, or managing your Amazon account. But, think about this in the larger scheme of pivot or persevere. This takes everything that you think about and everything that you do, and it moves it away from an emotional decision and makes it into an analytical decision. And we push very hard for people to be looking at this in terms of analytical mindset and not an emotional mindset. We all want our businesses to be doing better, but the data tells us what's really happening. And so if we can use this mentality and we can figure out where we're at today and what we're trying to do to improve our business, we can then measure that and determine whether it's working. And then when it's not working, you really have two choices. Choice number one is to pivot. So some pivots are big, some pivots are small, and there's different designs of pivots that you can do. So it could be just improving your product could be a pivot, or dumping your product could be a pivot, or persevere. To persevere means either that you're not getting enough data to make a decision, or the data is telling you that you need to keep heading down that path. But what's critical, it's not critical to either pivot or persevere. What's critical is to do the analysis to determine whether you should pivot or persevere, set the next hypothesis, and then rinse and repeat the system. So Brett, why don't you talk a little bit about kind of how you look at pivot or persevere in light of kind of the economic times, and then and how this is impacting things in managing your Amazon business?
Yeah, and obviously the impact of this has been massive. It's a game changer for a lot of businesses, and it's opening up a lot of opportunity for some, and it's closing a lot of doors on others. And it's important for you to understand what's happening to your business, and really think about how the audiences who might purchase your product are being impacted. So I've kind of got side-by-sides here with Pivot and Persevere with a couple examples, because I've heard people say some outlandish and outrageous things in the past couple of weeks, claiming certain categories are going away, or just there's no longer any demand. And I want to make sure that we're staying open-minded about some of these, because if you look at something like the target audience for, let's say, some console cell phone holders, for maybe some Uber drivers or something, that target audience is greatly impacted. They're very unlikely to be driving around right now, picking up hosts and driving them to their house. So that audience is absolutely impacted. But it's a great opportunity for a brand like that to focus on what they can do with new product development and think a little bit further down the road about what might be some outcomes from this. Second one that I've heard people say some things about is classrooms. That, with kids not having to go to school for the most part anymore, there's no need for supplies. But I actually see the converse based on the sales data we have. It's absolutely now that instead of teachers buying this for a whole group of kids, a lot of households are buying this just to keep their kids busy. So art supplies, craft supplies, things like that are actually increasing in a lot of spaces, so long as they're still advertising, they still have availability or stock. Additionally, think about the supply chains and the way the supply chains are being interrupted. Internationally, they're being interrupted pretty catastrophically, and they will see some ripple effect from this for some time to come. Even domestically, some shipments are being interrupted, but they're far more stable. A lot of our a lot of our clients who work with suppliers in the US are relatively uninterrupted right now. They still might have some impact, but they're looking at this as an opportunity to further solidify their position with the manufacturers they work with right now. Additionally, are your products going to still be in demand post-quarantine? Or are they going to be increasing in demand? There's going to be a lot of changes to the way people behave from this. You think about handshakes, a lot of people not considering handshakes as something they're going to be doing in the future. And we'll see how that plays out, but that might change the way people purchase certain types of products and the way they behave. There's going to be new opportunities, new markets being created where you could offer a product that didn't have any demand or a reason for it to be in demand 6 months ago, but suddenly now is extremely high demand, any sort of sanitizing product or anything like that.
And we talked a lot about alternative uses of products. Back when we launched Scope a couple of years ago, we talked a lot about alternative uses of products and understanding other ways that your product is being used. And sometimes that's a pivot or persevere moment as well. That, maybe you need to be looking at the packaging of your product and the way that it's being packaged or repackaged. And I think one of the critical pivot or persevere moments that I think a lot of Amazon sellers have had to make recently was inbound shipping to Amazon. Inbound shipping to Amazon and outbound shipping to Amazon have been impacted. Do I pivot? Do I open up merchant fulfilled? Do I order more inventory in? How much inventory do I bring in from my supplier during this moment when I don't know what's happening? And so we kind of looked at some of the upcoming events that are on the calendar that are things that we typically would be planning for at this point in time. And it sounds weird, right? In the middle of April to be talking about back to school, Halloween, Cyber 5, holiday shopping. And all of these become pivot or persevere moments for you and your business. And what's really interesting is that we don't have past data to indicate what this disruption is going to do to and for our business. And so you have to make some predictions. And so I'm curious in the chat, how are you looking at these 5 holidays, these 5 seasons that are coming up? Typically right now you'd be bringing all of your Prime Day inventory in. You have to have most of it to the Amazon warehouse by early June. Prime Day has been rumored to be moved to August, but it hasn't really been confirmed by Amazon. How are you looking at back to school? What changes are you going to make? Let's say you sell backpacks. Let's say you sell office supplies, school supplies. How do you package it differently when school may or may not be going back to session, where virtual schooling may become more of the norm, where more people might move to homeschooling? There's a lot of trends that are occurring. How do you look at Halloween? What's going to happen to Halloween? Are kids still going out to Halloween? Are they going to be doing costumes? How do you know what the demand for that is going to look like? How much risk are you willing to take? I think one of the things I said to Bret was this is where the sellers that come from China have an advantage, because they're a little bit more, have a higher risk tolerance traditionally than US based sellers. They'll bring products in to test a market. And a lot of these things are things that we're going to have to do to get through And if you're just looking at this as like the month of April or the month of April and maybe into May, you're looking way too short-sighted, because I believe this is something that will impact us for some considerable time. I don't want to put an actual time on it, because I don't know. I'm not an epidemiologist or claim to know that level, but that impact will be felt for a while. Not everybody will be going back to work on May 1st. Some companies may never reopen their door. Some companies may move to virtual forever, right? So remote workforce. Kids may or may not be going to camp this summer, depending on the region in which they live. Schools are going to be looking at things in a different manner. Technology is now opened up in a new way. Online buying, grocery buying has changed dramatically in the past 3 weeks. How much will people go back to their old ways versus staying in their new ways? These are all things that you need to consider. Curious, Brett, if you have any kind of additional thoughts to add to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, just like you mentioned earlier, you can't go into analysis paralysis. You can't start worrying about Q4 today. You have to think about it, and you have to make some educated guesses, but you can't allow yourself to not act because of that. Obviously, the closer the event is to today, the more likely it is to be disrupted. And just like you mentioned, it's anybody's best guess how long this will last, but I think there will be some effects in major markets for some time. Possibly years. Just look at what's happened with the oil industry right now. This is a game changer for sure.
And so when you look at this and you look at your pivot or persevere moments, one really critical factor to be looking at is what we call focus. And so how do you focus on the data that matters, the products that matter, and ultimately the results that matter. And so I'll give you, I guess, your second book in your reading library, but these are kind of like my Bibles. Not really my Bibles, but like my work Bibles. And so this is one called 80/20 Sales and Marketing by Perry Marshall. If you've been on my webinars before, I've referred to the 80/20 principle, and I've referred to this book in the past because it's got so much rich data in it that helps us figure out focus. And if you're not familiar with the Pareto principle, the Pareto principle tells us that 20% of the input, the time, the resource, the effort, accounts for 80% of the output. And what's critical in understanding something about the 80/20 rule is that it lives beyond, it lives within and beyond everything. It even lives in a weird way in itself. Okay, so that sounds like really confusing, but it's like 20, and we've all heard this, right? 20% of your customers drive 80% of your revenue. Okay, but did you know that 20% of the 20% drives 80% of the 80%? And so that actually gives you what's called a 16 times return on the investment if you're focusing on the right percentage of the customers, of the products, of the marketing effort, of the content, of the customer service. And so when we look at data management and we look at like, how do you take a shrinking budget? How do you take a reduced profit margin and put it to work? I want to put it to work where I have the effort that gets me the greatest results. And we have so many people who come to us at times and have a big catalog of products, and they're just spending way too much money on the 80% of their catalog that only drives 20% of their sales. But I'll guarantee you almost be close, not exact. If you have 100 products in your catalog, I bet 5% of those catalogs are driving 50+% of your profit. Why? Because the 80/20 rule tells me that. At the very least, 20% are driving 80% of your sales. And the same is true when you look at the impressions to clicks, the clicks to conversions, the traffic to conversions, and all the other numbers that we have within our Amazon ecosystem for doing our business. So when we look at the data, and Brett's going to talk a little bit about how he takes this concept and puts it to work, what's important for you is to understand how you actually apply this rule to your business to figure out the 20% of the effort that drives the 80% of the results.
Awesome. And first, I want to talk a little bit about software. If you're just an Ignite user and you're not necessarily an advanced user who's using bulk files and things like that, if you're just going into Ignite, I think number one, it's a time saver. It's going to help find efficiencies in your account, is setting up some form of automation. Highly recommend suggestion automation. You can also go through and use our scheduling or our ad scheduler to turn off certain days or hours when you don't expect conversions. So for those sellers who are really struggling right now and need to find some ways to cut costs and get a little bit better efficiencies, highly recommend setting up some automation and also adding some ad scheduling to cut back on days where you're just not getting conversions to begin with. Again, it's situational and it depends on your account, but I think those are great ways to spend 20% of your time and get 80% of that result right there, Jeff. The second one is, if you're using Ignite as well, is to start using smart filters. It'll save you a lot of time going in and having to query down to find profitable keywords, unprofitable keywords, ads that aren't performing well. It's a one click, simply go to the filtered keywords section, select the smart filters, and then choose the one you want to look at. So here's an actual example from an account that I just looked through. Just looking for keywords that were unprofitable, were not helping us. And I was quickly able to get a list of about 100 keywords or so that were not really adding value. And so we were able to cut all those out immediately. Took next to no time, added a lot of value immediately, and we were able to help find success with that account through these actions. But the other major thing that I think is very important right now for advertisers and sellers to keep front of mind is that there's a blip in the radar. There's something wrong in the past 60 days that you have to be compensating for. Whether you saw a drop in sessions or drop in clicks, or you saw an increase, you're going to have to attenuate that data and compensate for it. So unless you're a math wizard and you're interested in finding the formula that works best for you, you're probably just going to have to adjust the observation period. That's what my team is actually doing right now, and that's what a lot of companies are starting to do. Instead of looking at larger data sets, they're starting to look at smaller data sets and having to make more assumptions. They're having to make some educated guesses based on the actual keywords that users are typing in and the data that they're getting out from those clicks.
Yeah, and it's really critical. This is a critical piece because we've been trained, or we have trained everyone to look at the larger data. We've said, let data make the decision for you. We've said, let the data come in. But this is something, if we were to do that, we would be optimizing based off of a time period that included a different shopping mentality. And so, one of the things that Brett and I even talked about when putting this together was like, this isn't about pre-COVID, post-COVID. That is today. This is like pre-prime, post-prime, pre-back to school, post-back to school. So anytime you look at a changing event that's going to change the behavior or the way somebody is potentially shopping for your product because of some type of peak or valley that you might have, you need to look at the data differently coming out of that event than you did going into that event. So what are different ways, Brett, that your team is shifting the attention to really drive the win for your customers?
Yeah, number one is making sure that we're following the money. That's absolutely critical right now. You can have keywords that are costing you quite a bit of money, and it's just not noticeable because it's not showing up on your radar. If you solely followed that 80-20 and you only looked at the terms that produced a lot of spend, you'd miss everything that was unprofitable. And again, going back to the Ignite filters, I think that's a great way to quickly flag some things that are costing you, cut them out. Pay attention to where that money is going. Pay attention to the CPC. If you have keywords that have a very high CPC, that's very likely something that in aggregate is going to cost you a lot. I actually just did a restructure for a customer a couple days ago, and looking through his account, 40% of his ad spend was wasted. It was $30,000 just going down the drain towards terms that he didn't even know he was really bidding against. So it's really critical during this period to really focus on where that money's actually going, and be able to summarize some of that data so you can understand what's happening with your ad dollars. Next is paying attention to inventory, making sure that you check your restock report and restock inventory to know what you can restock, what you can't, and what you need to be. And then also using your inventory health to have an understanding of how long that inventory is actually going to last you. We've been doing this regularly and assisting clients who don't have the expertise themselves, making sure that they understand how to read these reports so they can get a better barometer for how long that inventory is going to last at FBA. Just like you mentioned, Jeff, I mean, some clients had to pivot and say, I'm going to do FBM. You know, I can get a higher margin, or I can just get it to the customer in a much better time. And we saw a number of them make that pivot. And we saw the ones who didn't are struggling a little bit more to figure out what to do next. Then that last bit is really understanding the supply chain. We're asking this quite regularly. What's happening to your supply chain? What's happening that's going to impact your business down the road that we should be aware of today? So whether that's manufacturing constraints, you're not going to get your boat on the water and you're not going to get inventory for a couple extra weeks. You need to have tabs on that the entire time, and you need to understand what the impact is going to be, not just this month and next month, but going into Q4 as well.
And you also have to anticipate the unanticipatable. Is that a word?
Yeah, I think so.
If not, I just made it up. But you have to assume, like, well, what happens if the Port of Los Angeles is shut down because of COVID? I got my products on ship and it's only going to take 4 weeks to get here, but it might take 3 weeks to get through customs instead of 2 because of the backup that may occur. And so you may, if you typically were stocking Amazon for 30 days worth of inventory, you might want to start looking at stocking Amazon for 60 days worth of inventory or 45 days worth of inventory. So you need to be making some slight adjustments to some of your practices and your processes to ensure that you have some of that extra coverage available for kind of the unforeseen. And if you're that slim in your margins, you know, you may not have a way around this, but if you have some room within your margins, this might be one of those investing a little bit of profit into having a more sustainable or defensible position. One of the things that we're sure of is that not everybody will come out of this okay. So I that sounds really horrible to say, but companies will go out of business. This is the reality of the situation. And we're already starting to see it when we look at our customers and we look at the competitors and competitors who are dropping off. And so this is where you don't know, and you have to make some assessments about your business and where you want to make your investments. And you want to start looking at, you know, if my competitors can't keep up and can I win market share? And so, you know, somebody that might have been there in March as a big competitor of yours might not be there when things settle at the end. So how's that going to impact your business? And is that a gamble or a bet you want to make? Are you in an essential goods where another 100 people are coming into your product? If you were selling toilet paper before, how many people are selling toilet paper now? I don't know how many people actually manufacture toilet paper, but you know, if you had I wanted to pick a very generic essential good that couldn't get me in any trouble, right? But that's something that's very important to be looking at as well.
Yeah, and thinking about that supply chain, Jeff, I mean, it's important to take a step back and think about it holistically. We're seeing consumable brands getting hit hard with unavailability of packaging. It's not the food they can't make anymore. They can keep making that, but it's actually packaging the food now that's a constraint. And so you need to really understand all of the components, look over the BOL, really understand BOM, bill of materials, understand what goes into your product, the finished good, and where there might be disruption beyond just the product itself.
So one of the concepts that we talk about specifically in the marketing department a lot about, and I think it's critical to talk about in managing data in a time of disruption, is the difference between outcomes and outputs. And an output is the task that's completed. The outcome is that desired effect. And a question that I ask a lot is, are we putting our efforts into the right things? So are we driving the type of outcomes that we desire? For instance, this webinar, there's a desired outcome for this webinar, and that is for you to either purchase Seller Labs software, continue using Seller Labs software, or try our managed services. Are we getting the output, the outcome that we want from the output, the effort that we're putting towards this webinar? That was actually pretty like humbling of me to just say that outright to all of you guys, but that's the reality of marketing and sales. And so how much of what you're doing when you're sitting at home, how much of what you're doing is just generating an output, where at the end of the day, you talk about how many emails you sent, or how many sessions you got for your page, or how many Facebook comments you were able to make, versus how many sales you got. And so if we're focusing ourselves on the right outcomes, or the right inputs to get the right outputs, to get the right outcomes, we're using our time the most efficiently. And it comes back to 80-20, because if I'm spending 80% of my time working on the things that drive the outcomes that I'm desiring for my business, I have a greater likelihood of my business succeeding. So taking that concept, let's talk about how to put those into SMART goals, and then measurable steps for making decisions of your business.
Yeah, and I'll let everyone read this Dilbert comic when they want, but essentially, a SMART goal is defined as a specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-based goal. And I absolutely love these because there's no faking them. You have to have clear, attainable results, something that you believe is relevant to what you're trying to achieve, something that you can measure with time. It gives you a great barometer for whether or not you're meeting your goals. And it's a great way to define when that pivot point is necessary, Jeff. But let's look at a couple, because I think people struggle with defining these accurately. So let's just look at a brand new product SMART goal. It's as simple as getting 10 new reviews. I'm going to use the early review program and request a review, or Feedback Genius, and I'm hoping to do it in the next 2 months. So now I know the time, I know what I'm measuring, I know how to, or whether or not it's attainable. I can quickly follow up and check, and it takes 2 seconds to check whether or not I met that goal. Now I could check halfway through and see if I'm on pace for it and make adjustments if needed. But really that gives you a key goal to focus on. And that's drastically different from, let's say, a mature product, rank 50 in a catalog or in a category. Maybe defining something more along the lines of organic ranking page 1 for pea protein by June. That's something that's more aggressive, but it's something that product might be able to achieve. And I'll have some examples here in a minute to show you, but really the goal then is ranking for pea protein, making sure that you show up on page 1 for that search. And so to influence that, you're going to have to use PPC. And you're going to want to make sure that there's a strong correlation between the conversions happening in that keyword on Amazon so that you get ranked for it. And you might have to also figure out how many sales you'd have to make to reach that level and to show up regularly based on where you are today. If you're on page 2, 3, 4, it might be a lot more than if you're at the bottom of page 1 or somewhere in the middle of page 1. But really, what this comes to is picking out your next step, picking out where you're going to go from where you are today. And not every step is going to be created equal. You can start out at the very bottom with a brand new product and work towards getting that first review or the first few reviews. Then you work on getting it ranking and trying to win a badge. Then you might go through some phase where you're working on getting the star rating up because it's taken a hit. And that could be a lot longer than the step before that or the step coming after that. But as you're working your way towards being a bestseller and ranking that product successfully in the category you're in, you're going to have a variety of steps to take. So I want to share
let me share one thing before you go into that, which is to say that sometimes when you're focusing on the one particular goal, you have what we call unintended consequences. And so be careful sometimes what the goal is, and how that goal will impact other things within your business. And so we see this a lot with people who come into our managed services group and go, I want to lower my ACOS. And we're like, well, is your goal really to lower your ACOS? Or is your goal to improve your profitability? Because they actually don't go hand in hand. And so sometimes when you set a particular goal or a particular step for yourself, you have to understand and ask yourself if you're actually asking the right question. Because we've had people come in and go, no, I want to lower my ACOS. And we bust our butt to lower their ACOS. And then all of a sudden their sales drop off and they want to know why their sales dropped off. And it's like, well, because to lower your ACOS, I had to reduce your ad spend. To reduce your ad spend, I reduced the number of impressions and the number of sales. Reducing the number of sales reduced your BSR. Reducing your BSR dropped your ranking. Mm-hmm. And so this is where it's really critical for you to understand, like, what is that goal and how does that goal impact other pieces and parts of your business, so that you ultimately are putting a series of steps together that are going to build you to what you're ultimately trying to succeed in.
Yep. Yeah. And I think this graphic does a decent job of illustrating that there's a lot of steps between launching your product and being a top seller. And you've got to go through a number of these steps to get to that point. But just like you mentioned, Jeff, yeah, you can handicap yourself by picking a bad goal. One reason why we love those SMART goals is because I wouldn't accept a SMART goal for a new product that you want to be top 5 in your category in 3 months. It's just not achievable unless it's a very niche product. But I think this image does a great job of illustrating that not all steps are the same length. They're not all as even. They're going to be ones where you're kind of plateau for a while and you're trying to figure out how to get beyond the step you're on right now. And there's some where you're at the bottom of the steps and it seems like a daunting task to get to the top, which is why you have to define those SMART goals along the way so you can keep making progress and keep stepping up that ladder. So here I got an example of just 3 of those products using that pea protein example. We've got the new product here on the left, the organic pea protein powder. No reviews, no rating, brand new product essentially. Doesn't have a lot of social proof or a lot of trust behind it. That goal for that product is probably to get those first reviews or generate those first few sales. And if you look at what tools you're using to generate those reviews, that could be selling the first 100 units at a loss or at break even. It could be selling the first 1,000, depending upon the review rates for your types of products. The second one is the middle item, which is the Amazon's Choice badge. He's taken some steps up that ladder, but he's only got 800 reviews there or under. And so there's still a ways to go to be #1 bestseller in that category, which is the product on the right there. Almost 9,000 reviews, definitely a lot of social proof behind it. They're also able to charge a little bit of a premium for it. And obviously there's a lot of stepping stones in between all of these products. It's not as clear as just selling more and you suddenly rank. You're going to have missteps where you've defined a goal that's not actually helping you, and you're eventually going to have to pivot out and figure out a new way to get to where you're trying to go.
And I know this isn't what you intended, but this also shows the difference of how packaging makes a difference. When you see all of 3 of these next to each other, the one on the right looks like or feels like it's the biggest, even though they're all 2 pounds. The one on the left actually feels like it's the smallest and it's the biggest at 2.2 pounds. So this just goes to illustrate how photos and images and all of that come into play in how you sell your product and how you make your product stand out across the competition. Not the point of today's webinar, but a good point to share nevertheless.
Definitely, Jeff. And I think that also illustrates the point that it's not as simple as launching the product. You're going to have to make changes to get past those plateaus. So you might have that Amazon's Choice badge for months on end and say, why can't I rank higher in this category? I'm at a great price point. I have my reviews. And this is where I love to tell brands, don't obsess about why your product is better. Obsess about why your competitors' products are better. Find what actually makes them rank and sell better than you, and learn whether or not it's something you need to add as a feature or benefit. You need to change something. Maybe it's the photo. Maybe it's the number of reviews. Maybe it's the price. You've got to look at it very objectively and figure out what makes them a better alternative to what you're offering. Next, I wanted to cover a couple metrics that I think are super important right now, Jeff. And one of these I kind of touched on earlier with CPCs. Definitely focus on your cost per clicks right now. You can have a lot of terms that are costing you just $1 here and there, but in aggregate, you'll have thousands of them over a month or 2 months. So one thing my team does is actually goes through and we look for high cost per click terms, and we have to manually inspect them. Now that's in that 80-20 principle, Jeff, that's 80% of the work. That's a lot of work to go through and do. Not everyone has the time or manpower to do that. And so if you don't, a good solution might be Ignite or something like that, or managed services, should it be a fit for you. But you're gonna have to find ways to cut some of those. And part of it might be just investing that time right now, so you can cut out a number of those keywords that are costing you. You have a dollar here, a dollar there. You start to add that up, eventually it becomes something sizable where you wouldn't have put money towards it if you knew it was going down the drain. Next one is keyword conversion rate. Absolutely important right now, and this plays into 80-20 as well. You'll notice that your top keywords probably have a high conversion rate, and that's one key to their success and why they work so well. Amazon's essentially rewarding you with a lower cost per click because your conversion rate's great, and they're going to keep throwing traffic your way. So you find those products that have a great conversion rate, you find the keywords that have a great conversion rate, you pair them together, and it's the recipe for success right there. And then the last one is placement reports. I think these are extremely important right now. Make sure you're focused on where your placements are and what you're achieving with them. This next slide, I actually have a graphic from inside of Ignite that shows you this, but we're looking at whether the placements were top of search, rest of search, or Amazon detail pages. And you're also able to add modifiers to your bid to adjust based on those placements. So a great opportunity here for this brand would be actually doubling down on that top of search, making sure that they're ranking there successfully and giving a little bit more leeway for Amazon to play with that budget and that bid over time, since they're getting a great click-through rate and a great ACoS on those terms. Now, let's shift gears a little bit, Jeff, and talk kind of just observations, trends, things we're seeing. I don't have a ton of graphics here, but I'd love to just kind of talk with you about it.
Yeah, so this is something we do every Friday. We have an event called Office Hours. I see a lot of names on here are people who have attended our office hours. And one of the things we do at Office Hours that I think is that I think is really different than these are more like canned presentations, trying to provide you some good value into how to run your business. Office Hours are more like open. I mean, think of it almost as like a radio talk show. And actually, we're trying to make it more like that. Where you have an opportunity to come on. So Caroline will post into the chat how to sign up for our weekly event. Oh my God, it's like totally snowing. I'm gonna see if I can get my camera to go outside and show you guys how bad it's snowing right now. It's kind of crazy. But these are observations. We look at observations from like what's happening in the market that gives us an opportunity to kind of talk about we're talking with clients on a daily basis. So like what's happening today, and then we'll jump into some Q&A. So the big one that was announced today was that Amazon is opening inbound shipping. So you can start to get your products back into Amazon. But outbound is still delayed. We're still seeing delays at around 3 weeks. I think that in time, that's going to, in the next week or so, that should start to come back. Brett, what else are you seeing?
Definitely seeing that there's a lot of changes happening at Amazon internally right now. We're definitely seeing a lot of shifts in features. So a lot of stuff's rolling out right now. I'm guessing, if everything had been on track and performing normally, a lot of brands would be looking to leverage these tools going into Prime Day, really get them under their belt and get them into their tool set. So we're seeing the ability to edit creative on sponsored brand ads and things like that. You can now start modifying the creative that you create. So a great opportunity, instead of having to publish one every single time, just be able to tweak something you have that's already working. But beyond that, I mean, we see a lot of new features rolling out and getting adjusted over the past couple of weeks. And I think we'll continue to see that for the next month or so.
Yeah, I think one of the big ones that I've been seeing is that clients that have had the ability to pivot are seeing success. So we talked about pivot or persevere earlier in the webinar, but the clients who have been able to successfully pivot, airship their products in so they don't run out, move to merchant fulfilled, import a new product that they weren't selling before. Those are the ones who are seeing success. The ones who are struggling, just to be quite honest, the ones who are struggling are the ones who are just kind of sitting by asking the questions of like, well, what's Amazon going to do to help me? So we don't recommend that you sit by and say, what's Amazon going to do to help me? How are you seeing things at kind of the SKU level?
Yeah, definitely seeing some changes in demand for certain SKUs. But I'm actually seeing a lot of brands get creative with what they're doing to alleviate overstock. Great time when a lot of things are unavailable to begin with. Great time to go and fix those listings. So we've seen a couple brands go through and adjust imagery for products that were not selling before and immediately start to see those items take off. They'd been letting it sit on the back burner because it didn't seem like a high priority thing. And suddenly they're faced with a crap sandwich, for no other way to put it. And they got to do something. So they get creative and they say, I'm going to go adjust these photos. I'm going to go adjust this title or lower this price. I'm going to try to capitalize on this opportunity right now.
So whether it's COVID-19 or whether it's buyer seller messaging, terms of best practices, terms of service change, inbound shipping changes, pricing changes to warehousing costs, the inventory performance index, all of these things that impact our business, there's more to come. We have to continue to be prepared for the unpreparable. We have to continue to be able to shift and move as the industry shifts and move. We have to be able to make decisions of, is it time to pivot or persevere? So a lot of the data that Bret shared with you today comes from a report that he has created for our clients. We call it the Advertising Campaign Assessment Report. And so we'll just kind of throw up a couple screens here quickly for you guys to see. But what we were able to show you today was kind of an aggregate of all of this data that helps us kind of pull this together. It was, not showing any particular persons, but showing in general how we see these trends kind of flow out. But if you're interested in kind of seeing how this data impacts you and you want to have a better visual representation into your 80-20. So go back, because that middle slide is like, that's almost like your 80-20 slide, even though we don't call it that. It's going to visually show you where your sales are versus where your spend is. And so that upper right corner with the big green button means that I'm spending a lot without driving a lot of sales. And so I want to be spending a lot and getting a lot of sales, which means I can determine my wasted ad spend pretty easily. So if you would like kind of a visual representation as to how your brand is doing, if you're more visually driven by colors and red and green and things like that kind of tell you where to spend your time, we're making this report available. It's typically only available to our paying clients, but we're making this report available. So why don't we show them where they can get the report? And we'll do a little Q&A. And if you're interested, you can download this report and email it to us, and we'll come back to you with your own campaign assessment report. And as part of returning that report to you, we'll actually show you how the doc works, which is actually the cool part, because there's a whole bunch of filters and levers and things that you can do to kind of look at it by product or by groups of products, to kind of see how things are doing. And one of the big things we see is that Seller Central has so much data that is hard to understand and hard to visualize and identify. And so that's really where this was built from, was built under this idea that we wanted to have a better visual way to share with our customers how their accounts are doing. So if you would like that, just follow these instructions, or we can email them to you and we can get you back that report. So with that, thank you for your time and your analysis, Bret. Really appreciate it. Would like to open this up to Q&A. So if anybody has a Q&A, they can post it in the chat. One that I already shared with you was somebody asking for the names of the books that I shared earlier. So those are posted in the Q&A, but it's 80-20 Sales and Marketing by Perry Marshall. I'll give you a hint. If you go to, I think it's perrymarshall.com, I think you can buy the book for a penny. You get on his mailing list and all that kind of stuff, but you can get the book for a penny. And then The Lean Startup by Eric Ries. And would love to know from you guys in the chat, like what books drive you in your business decisions. Bret and I are always looking for something new to read. We can cover some of the other books that we've read. in future podcasts. But would love to hear from you as well, and what's driving you. So Brett, one question I see come in here is around, I think everyone's kind of looking for, like, what do I do with my advertising? Do I increase my spend? Do I decrease my spend? So how are you guys kind of working with sellers specifically to analyze their advertising and make adjustments? Are you doing it daily now? Are you doing it weekly? Like, how are you doing it different today, than how you were doing it 3 weeks ago? And what kind of advice do you have for people in general in terms of managing ads?
Yeah, definitely an increased frequency. So looking at the data more frequently, even if we're not making specific changes, sometimes it is, waiting till we have a little bit more information to go on. But definitely you have to be in there more often than you had to, 6 weeks ago. Things behaved normally 6 weeks ago. They do not today. And so you've got to be keeping an eye on where that money's going. The other thing we've been doing is kind of doing a custom approach for each client, really trying to understand their unique needs, what their supply chain looks like, how it's going to be impacted, and making changes daily, sometimes, often, or multiple times a day to keep up with what's needed. So, we might go with one strategy in the morning, and then they get an update from their manufacturer that later that night, we get an email, and we'll make some adjustments as well. But it is touch and go. It's keeping an eye on it consistently. That's kind of what we're able to do because we are focused on advertising on Amazon. For somebody who's trying to do this and they have got a dozen other hats to wear, I would look for tools that can help you, like Ignite. You're going to want to save some time. And then I would also look for maybe somebody who's skilled that can come in and help you automate the process a little more.
Gotcha. So one other question that kind of came in with regards to listings and listing changes. The question was, is this the time should I make changes to my listing specific to the pandemic? Should I, I think what they're asking is, like, should they, bring COVID into their response in some way, shape, or form? Are you guys talking to any customers about listing optimizations and kind of how this impacts it?
Yeah, we haven't been taking that tact. I mean, I think everyone in the world is feeling it to some degree. I mean, there's not a soul on earth that hasn't been impacted by this or will be impacted by this in some way, or know someone that is. And so you've got to understand it's front of mind for a lot of people. Most everyone knows about it. I don't see the benefit in including, great shipping during COVID or anything like that in your title. I just would stay away from that. I would focus on adding value that you really think is going to increase conversions, and then measure it. Set up those SMART goals and really know, hey, I changed my headshot on Wednesday. I'm already seeing an uptick in traffic. Let me keep tabs on this. 2 weeks later, maybe you can make a decision on whether or not it worked or not.
Yes, I don't know if you know this question. It was asked, but it was around inventory and managing inventory. I know Amazon has waived long-term storage fees as part of this, but the question is like how. The question that they're asking is relation to managing inventory during times like these, and if they should be sending more in or less in. We covered this a little bit earlier, but how do you manage how are you recommending inventory management? I think is the gist of what they're asking.
Yeah, I think it comes down to the same basic principle. You have to check it more frequently. You need to have an understanding and then draw some conclusions or run some forecasts and say, hey, I'm seeing increased buyer demand right now. My conversion rate's held pretty steady. That's in all likelihood means this trend should continue. You have to look at the product specifically, but that can give you a better idea of whether or not you really want to ship in more right now or you want to hold off. I think it's very situational based on the category and the product that you're selling.
Last question that I'm going to answer or have you answer here is around data and data frequency. And the question is how often should I be checking my ads? It actually got asked a couple of times, and I know you've kind of covered this, but I think it's just something that really kind of hones in on people and trying to understand how they want to manage themselves through this. maybe you can speak a little bit to the Amazon algorithm and the data algorithms and how often data is updated, if um, that can help add some relief to people that checking your ads, once an hour doesn't do you any good.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, if you're checking every hour, I'm really sorry. That's an awful problem to have. The data doesn't even refresh that quickly. So at most, I would say once per day, unless you really have detailed objectives. Like for a lot of our clients, we're launching sponsored brand ads and making a number of changes that require us to be in there more than one time per day, or we're looking at different subsets of their catalog. But for most sellers, I mean, I would say 2 to 4 times per week. Probably 3 being that sweet spot. Check it on Monday, check it on Wednesday or Thursday, and then check it on Friday or Saturday if you're working on the weekends as well. But definitely make sure you're in there frequently, but I wouldn't be in there every hour. I mean, Amazon doesn't even refresh that quickly, and their best sellers ranks and things like that aren't calculated that often. So you're not going to see the needle move that often.
Yeah, and I think the data that Amazon has shared with us in the past, just so everybody knows, is that it actually takes Amazon about 72 hours to fully get a day's worth of data into the system. So so it is critical that you give it some time, because it's just going to take a while. And we still haven't really truly seen the impact of these 3-week ship dates. Because I think the initial ship dates are just now coming up from people that ordered 3 weeks ago. Are people canceling those orders? What's happening to those orders? How does Amazon treat the sale? Do they treat the sale when the product is shipped, or do they treat the sale when the product was purchased? Traditionally, it's when the product ships. It's when the credit card fully goes through. I haven't seen or know this data specifically to know whether people are able to see that immediately and understand whether it's impacting their algorithm right then and there, or whether it's requiring that longer period of time. So just understand that Amazon is making changes because of these. We're making changes because of these. We're here to help as a company. Our chat is open on our website. You're always welcome to reach out to our team. You're welcome to find Bret and I either on LinkedIn or email us directly. And we will all get through this. We'll get through this together. As I've been saying in some of my previous webinars, remember the elderly and the people that are used to having some friends and some people check in on them. Take a moment, check in on somebody today. Make that your good deed of the day, if you will. Check in on one person that you haven't checked in on in a while, and just say hello and say hi and share your good wishes with that person. It's greatly appreciated. So thank you everybody for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you at future webinars.
Thanks, Jeff.